South Africans have the means to rid society of discrimination and inequality created by humanity. This is according to the National Action Plan that aims to combat racism, discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance. One of the main aims of the plan is to promote human dignity through the promotion and protection of human rights. I'm joined now by CEO at the South African Human Rights Commission, Advocate Tseliso Thipanyane, to give us more clarity. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I suppose, when it comes to tolerance and instilling that sense of Ubuntu and really ensuring a sense of dignity, some policies and frameworks need to be in place to steer the community and communities within that direction. Let's talk about this plan.
Good day to you and to your viewers. Yes, the National Action Plan against racism is really, evolving out of the World Conference on Racism, which we had in Durban many years ago. And really the plan is to help us as a country to give effect to the principles in our constitution of creating a non-racial society, coming out of a long history of racialism. And of course it's also underpinned by the points you're raising that, issues of dignity, respect for the being of the other. So the plan really is for government, to consolidate its policies, its programs and agendas, but also all of us as South Africans, to find ways in which we could work together as private sector through different institutions and mechanisms to really, live to the ideals of a non-racial South Africa, where you are not judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character, as Martin Luther said.
How will it essentially work and be implemented to really touch people's lives and make a difference? Because, it sounds really good on paper, but the problem of execution and implementation is always going to be a big question mark.
Yes, it's really about, setting up policies, setting up laws, and making sure the institutions like us as the South African Human Rights Commission, which also plays a part in making sure that, we address issues of racism, issues of equality courts, how we use our institutions, our schools, our churches, our homes, but also to create a deeper sense of culture, a consciousness towards non-racialism, how we use our arts, our sporting issues, everything really which is necessary to ensure that, we do establish this culture of non-racialism, which is basically underpinned by the respect of the other.
The collection of data regarding racism and discrimination can be seen as perhaps a bit of a challenge. How do you then suppose the way forward would be when it comes to those processes that will make sure that this plan is indeed effective?
Yeah. Let's look at our current legal framework. We have the Equality Act and you have the Employment Equity Act. Let's take the Employment Equity Act. This requires almost all employers or all institutions really to ensure that, the workplace really does promote issues of equity, equality from gender to race. The Equality Act itself also requires all organs of state and any entity in this country to introduce programs which will basically address issues of non-racialism. Now, we must bear in mind that no one is born a racist. So basically, society, through its own structures, does create a level of racism. So we need to unlearn, but also educate our people against non-racialism. Towards non-racialism.
South Africa is really essentially notorious for the xenophobic violence against refugees. If anything, looking back at what transpired in 2008, in 2015 and in 2019, those riots essentially centered around, South Africans wanting jobs and feeling like their jobs are being pinched away from them by foreign nationals. How then will that discussion factor in to begin to embark on that educational you speak of?
It's a very interesting point. If you look at our so-called peculiar brand of xenophobia in our country, it's directed only at certain groups, largely black people. You hardly ever hear white people who are foreigners, or Chinese who are foreigners, or Indian people who are foreigners, or whatever. So it also shows you a mindset which needs to be fixed. Xenophobia, it's about, hatred or dislike of the other, someone who's not part of you. But in our country, we only focus largely on black Africans. So that again, shows the mindset which we need to address through education and also policies, to address these issues. It is a learned behavior. It is a taught behavior. So how come in our own country, largely xenophobia is directed towards black people?
What are some of the interlinking conversations when it comes to that exactly? I mean, you speak about, who is this hate targeted towards, but when it comes to access and really understanding the socio-economic problems, surely now it brings in another conversation on board. You speak of racism on one end, but it almost feels like you cannot separate the socio-economic factor and poverty when it comes to the overall conversation.
No, certainly at the end of the day, it really boils down to power and wealth. I recall many years ago in our country, where there's funny situation where Japanese were labeled as honorary whites because of the wealth of Japan, and Chinese were labeled as black. So really, one of the issues which we need as a country in order to address the issues of racism is to ensure that there is fair and equal distribution of wealth in our country. So as long as one group is seen as being more wealthier than the other, this mindset will continue that, white is associated with supremacy and richness and superior intellect. So we do need to break all these walls, which are basically unscientific, based on nothing but myths and perceptions.
We've just heard now Minister in the Presidency, Mondlu Gungubele, as he outlined some of the outcomes of the post-cabinet meeting held yesterday, speaking to the Zimbabwean spatial permit, saying that there's a 12-month grace period when it comes to expiry, as the permits come to an end on the 31st of December this year, and then that there'll be that grace period. What's your take on how this will be received, or perhaps understood as that grace period is underway? Do you foresee it triggering any sort of, chaos in any form?
Well, the government really has to have a very clear policy as to how it regulates who comes into our country and who stays in our country. So the Zimbabwean situation was a special dispensation to respond to a particular issue. But, when that situation is ending, we really need to have a much more clearer policy. I mean, yesterday there was a march to the commission by a group of South Africans who are unhappy about, the unregulated nature of undocumented migrants. But even then, who knows who's an undocumented migrant? Because we don't even carry IDs on our bodies. So tomorrow I might just be picked up because if I don't have papers to be an undocumented migrant. So we need to have a much more clearer policy, but also educate South Africans. I mean, let's take our country, for example. You have many people who are of European descent here. How many of them are citizens, how many of them are not? But we simply assume that because you are white in this country, you are here illegally. That is not correct.
And you often find some community members also speaking to some of the crimes being directed to foreign nationals, pointing fingers at foreign nationals, speaking about the tracking of undocumented foreign nationals in South Africa when it comes to committing crimes. I mean, it's almost a very sensitive conversation to have, a very uncomfortable one to have. But what is the reality on the ground, or perhaps the myths that need to be dispelled when it comes to the high levels of crimes that we've seen in various communities?
Yeah, look, no one can deny that, non-nationals in our country will also contribute to some crimes. But, we should also, work and act on clear facts. So there are lots of myths that, foreigners are causing crimes. But we have very high levels of crime in our country, high levels of rape, high levels of robbery. What percentage of those crimes are being caused by South Africans and caused by other non-nationals? But secondly, what about other forms of crimes which are not popular? What about white-collar crime? And what do we say about that? So it's really, as I was saying, about education, it's about perception, but also facts. So I think we also have a responsibility as government and everybody else to really act on facts and not really act on myths. So take, for example, our hearing now in Durban, issues of Phoenix. There's looting by many people, but because the majority of black people were looters, what happens? Those who feel that victimized target African people. And therefore the assumption is that black people are looters, which is not only black people are looters, which is not correct. So these are the perceptions which we need to address if we want to fight non-racialism, as well as the gender stereotypes.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time. Let's leave it there. Advocate Thipanyane, there from the South African Human Rights Commission, speaking to the National Action Plan aimed at combating racism, discrimination, and racial discrimination, as well as xenophobia and those sort of intolerances.